The battle over Mirren Prime was supposed to be the end of the human resistance. The Galactic Empire had been chasing them for months, pushing them back from one star system to another, forcing them to retreat every time. Now, the Empire's full fleet surrounded the planet like a steel cage. Thousands of warships floated in space, their weapons aimed at the surface. The order was simple: wipe out the last humans on the ground and crush their small space forces in one final strike. In the Imperial command ship, the mood was confident. Generals and admirals leaned over glowing maps of the battlefield, pointing out weak spots where they expected humans to break. They had seen it before. Humans were stubborn, but small in number. In the Empire's eyes, this would be quick and decisive. The only thing left after today would be to broadcast their victory across the galaxy as a warning to anyone else who thought about defying them. Down on the planet's surface, Captain Elias Ward stood in the ruins of an old city. Smoke drifted through shattered streets, and the air was filled with the low hum of human fighters preparing for takeoff. His armor was scarred from weeks of fighting, but his eyes were calm. He knew the numbers. They were outgunned 100 to 1. His forces were only a handful of ships, a few ground units, and some scavenged weapons. Against the Empire's massive fleet, it looked like suicide. But Elias had fought the Empire long enough to understand something they didn't. The Empire believed this was the final human army. They thought this was all Earth had left to give. They didn't know the truth. This was not humanity's last stand. This wasn't even the real fight. High above, the first wave of Imperial ships entered the atmosphere, raining fire on the outskirts of the city. Buildings crumbled into dust. The ground shook with every impact. Yet Elias didn't rush to meet them head-on. Instead, he gave quiet orders over the comms. His voice was steady, almost casual, as if he were telling someone to set the table for dinner, not to engage an Empire's army. Small groups of human fighters broke from the city and disappeared into narrow canyons and tunnels, hidden from the Empire's scanners. Others climbed into ancient anti-air platforms that had been repaired just enough to work for one last mission. The Empire's ships moved in to finish the job, confident there was nothing the humans could do. Then it began. Explosions ripped through the lead Imperial squadrons, not from the humans' main defenses, but from charges buried deep in the ground, detonated at the perfect moment. The Empire's ships swerved, breaking formation, just as hidden cannons in the mountains opened fire. Dozens of fighters went down before the Imperials even realized what had happened. From above, the Imperial Admiral watched his clean, calculated assault turn into chaos. He barked orders, demanding his ships regroup, but before they could, a human strike team emerged from low orbit. It was only 12 ships patched together from stolen parts and old Earth designs. But they moved like predators, slipping through the Empire's bigger, slower vessels, hitting them in their weak spots, then vanishing before the enemy could target them. Elias Ward's voice came through the comms of every human ship. Keep moving. Don't let them get a lock. Hit and vanish. His tone was calm, but his mind was sharp, reading the battle like a chessboard. Every move the Empire made, he was already 2 steps ahead. Within an hour, the impossible happened. The Empire lost an entire fleet wing. Hundreds of ships burned in the skies over Mirren Prime, falling like meteors into the planet's atmosphere. Human forces had taken almost no losses. In the command ship, silence fell. The Admiral stared at the destruction on the screen, his confidence draining away. This wasn't what he had expected. This wasn't the desperate last strike of a dying army. This was a carefully planned operation, carried out by soldiers who knew exactly what they were doing. On the surface, Elias stood in the shadow of a broken tower, watching enemy ships crash in the distance. A young soldier ran to him, breathless. "Captain, we've done it! The fleet wing is gone!" Elias gave a small nod. His expression didn't change. Instead, he lifted his comm device, knowing the Empire would be listening. His voice was calm, almost quiet, but it carried an edge that froze the blood of every Imperial officer who heard it. "This is just the scouting party." The words hung in the air like a blade. It wasn't a threat, it was a statement of fact. The soldiers standing near Elias looked at each other, confused. But in the Imperial war room, panic began to spread. If these humans weren't the real army, then what was coming? Above the planet, the Empire's remaining ships pulled back to regroup, but the damage was done. The myth of the Empire's unstoppable power had been broken in a single day. The name Elias Ward began to circulate in whispers, carried by fear through the ranks of Imperial soldiers. The battle was over for now, but in truth, it had only just begun. The Empire thought they were facing the last humans in the galaxy. They didn't yet understand. They had just been given a warning. And if they didn't take it seriously, the real human army would make sure they never forgot it. In the days after the battle over Mirren Prime, the Empire's officers met in sealed war rooms, their faces pale and tense. The footage from the destroyed fleet wing replayed over and over, every angle studied, every tactic analyzed, but no one could explain how a few battered human ships had cut through an armada. The official reports used words like unexpected resistance and tactical irregularities. But behind closed doors, the truth was admitted in hushed voices. They had been humiliated. Rumors began to swirl through the Imperial ranks. Some said the humans had stolen advanced alien technology. Others claimed they had a secret weapon that could pierce any shield. But the most unsettling whispers were the simplest. Those weren't even their real soldiers. No one could confirm where the idea came from, but it spread like fire. In the capital city, deep inside the Grand Palace, the Imperial High Council summoned every intelligence officer who had ever dealt with humans. They demanded answers, but the intelligence files painted a picture that was even worse than anyone expected. For decades, humans had fought in small groups, rarely committing large numbers to battle. Most of their wars in the galaxy had been carried out by volunteers, private crews, or mercenary units. If this was true, then the force at Mirren Prime wasn't humanity's main strength. It was barely a fraction. The Emperor's chief advisor slammed a hand against the table. If this is their scouting force, he said, what will happen when they bring the real army? No one in the room spoke. The silence felt heavy, as if the very air had turned cold. Across the stars, in the smoldering ruins of Mirren Prime, Captain Elias Ward walked among the surviving soldiers, checking the wounded and giving orders for repairs. He didn't need to know what the Empire was saying about him. He could feel it. He knew fear was already spreading through their command. That was the first step. Far above the planet, an Imperial listening post intercepted a coded human message. It was short, simple, and terrifying. Hold position until the home guard arrives. The message was forwarded through every level of command until it reached the Emperor himself. He read it 3 times, his jaw tightening. He had heard of the Home Guard, an earthbound force that had never left the human homeworld in recorded history. No one knew why they had never been deployed, but legends among spacers spoke of them as ghosts, warriors who only appeared when the survival of humanity itself was at stake. The Emperor turned to his admirals, but none would meet his eyes. They had fought what they thought was the final human army and failed. If there truly was another force, one even stronger, then the Empire might be facing something it had never prepared for. In a quiet barracks far from the front lines, a young Imperial pilot read the intercepted message in secret. His hands shook as he imagined what the arrival of the Home Guard would mean. In training, he had been told that humans were dangerous because they refused to surrender, even in hopeless situations. But now he understood something worse. They didn't just fight to survive. They fought to win. And they did it with patience, planning, and the kind of skill that came from countless unseen wars. On Mirren Prime, night fell. Elias stood alone on the edge of the ruins, looking up at the stars. Somewhere out there, beyond the Empire's borders, the real army was gathering. He didn't know exactly when they would arrive, but he knew one thing. The Empire's greatest mistake had been to think humanity was finished. Now, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. The Empire's outer defense network stretched like a wall of steel across dozens of systems. Yet in the last 24 hours, strange incidents began to occur. Patrol ships vanished without sending distress calls. Listening stations went silent. At first, Imperial Command dismissed these as mechanical failures or pirate attacks. But then came the pattern. Every disappearance was along a direct route from the edge of known space straight toward the Mirren sector. In a darkened control room aboard the Imperial flagship, analysts worked frantically to decode another intercepted human transmission. The voices were distorted, the language clipped, but the message came through with icy clarity. 4 days. Hold the line. The technicians exchanged uneasy glances. They didn't need to guess who the message was for. It was an order for the scattered human forces to dig in and wait. Wait for what? They didn't want to know. On the streets of the imperial capital, news of the Mirren battle leaked through underground channels despite heavy censorship. Merchants whispered it in the marketplaces. Soldiers spoke of it in low voices in the barracks. The common citizens of the Empire had always seen humans as a stubborn but backward species. Now, for the first time, they spoke of them with something close to fear. Far from the capital, a small Imperial scout craft picked up massive energy spikes at the edge of the galactic rim. The readings didn't match any known Empire or Allied ships. They were too fast, too organized, moving with a precision the scanners had trouble tracking. The scout captain tried to send a full report, but his signal cut out mid-sentence. His transmission ended with a sudden, sharp intake of breath, and then nothing. Back on Mirren Prime, Elias Ward walked among the ruins as his soldiers repaired what they could. Every so often, his eyes flicked to the sky. He had no comm confirmation yet, but he didn't need one. He had fought with the Home Guard before, long ago, before they returned to Earth and vanished from the galaxy's wars. If they were on the move now, it meant something. Something final. In the Imperial War Council chamber, a young officer presented the decoded fragments of the intercepted messages to the Emperor. The chamber was silent as the officer read aloud. "The real army will be in position soon." Those words alone sent a ripple of unease through the high command. The Emperor leaned forward, his voice low and tight. "Destroy them before they arrive." But it was already too late. At the edge of human space, hidden among the black void between stars, the first vanguard of the Home Guard adjusted their course toward Mirren Prime. Their engines were silent, their weapons charged, and their orders absolute. Arrive, engage, and end the war. The first sign of their arrival was not the sound of engines or the flash of weapons, but the sudden silence in the void. Imperial long-range sensors, which normally hummed with the constant noise of space traffic, went dead across multiple sectors. For a full minute, the Empire's monitoring stations reported nothing at all, as if the stars themselves had stopped moving. Then, in perfect unison, every sensor lit up with readings that overloaded the displays. From the bridge of the Imperial flagship, Admiral Saraxis stared at the data. Dozens, no, hundreds of unknown ships were emerging from hyperspace in precise formation. They weren't just entering the system. They were sliding into it, as if they'd been there all along, hidden in the folds of space. Each vessel was a masterpiece of warcraft, sleek, black-hulled, bristling with weapons that no Imperial database could identify. On the ground at Mirren Prime, Elias Ward stood in the open, his gaze fixed on the sky. One by one, the black silhouettes broke through the upper atmosphere, their hulls catching the light of the distant sun. The sound came next, deep, resonant, like the roar of an ancient storm rolling over metal mountains. Soldiers around him stopped what they were doing, staring upward as if witnessing something unreal. The Empire's forward defense fleet moved to intercept, confident in their numbers. They opened fire the instant the humans came within range. Bright lances of plasma lit up the darkness, only to splash harmlessly against shimmering shields that didn't even flicker. The Home Guard didn't fire back immediately. They advanced in silence, letting the Imperial gunners empty their magazines in frustration. When the order finally came, it was delivered in the calm voice of a Home Guard commander. Engage. The human ships erupted with light, beams of energy, so precise they cut through Imperial shields as if they were made of paper, tore across the formation. Capital ships broke apart in seconds, their wreckage spinning into the void. Smaller craft were swallowed in blinding bursts of fire. From the ground, it looked like pieces of the sky were falling. Admiral Saraxis barked for reinforcements, but the comm lines filled with static. Human electronic warfare had locked down every Imperial channel. He turned to his officers, but their faces told him what he already knew. They were trapped, cut off, and being dismantled piece by piece. Elias listened to the distant thunder of orbital battle and allowed himself the smallest smile. This was what the Empire had feared without even understanding it. The Home Guard didn't come to fight for survival. They came to end things. Above Mirren Prime, The Imperial fleet's outer line shattered, ships breaking formation in panic. The Home Guard pressed forward, their advance methodical, unstoppable. There was no taunting, no wasted movement, just the quiet efficiency of soldiers who had spent their entire lives preparing for this moment. The galaxy was watching now. Somewhere out there, every rival power, every neutral trader, every hidden observer knew what they were seeing. Humanity's real army had finally arrived. If the first strike came without warning. One moment, the skies above Mirren Prime burned with the glow of ships locked in orbital combat, and the next, streaks of fire tore down through the clouds. They weren't random bombardments. They were pinpoint drops, so precise that each impact landed exactly where human scouts had marked enemy strongholds days earlier. The ground shook as the first Home Guard strike teams touched down. Their dropships were nothing like the Empire had seen. Low, angular craft that hit the ground hard, armor thick enough to shrug off direct plasma fire. Hatches blew open before the dust had even settled, and soldiers poured out, moving in perfect formation. Their armor was dark, matte, built for speed and defense, and every soldier carried weapons that didn't match any Imperial database. In the ruins of the city, Imperial garrisons scrambled to mount a defense. They expected a furious, chaotic rush, something they could counter with sheer numbers. Instead, the Home Guard moved with terrifying precision, each unit covering the other. Every shot placed exactly where it needed to be. It wasn't just skill. It was the kind of discipline that came from generations of training for a single purpose. Elias Ward watched from a rooftop as the first Imperial lines broke. He could hear their panicked shouts through open comms, calls for reinforcements that would never arrive, orders shouted over the sound of weapons that were already falling silent. The Home Guard didn't waste a second chasing fleeing soldiers. They advanced relentlessly toward their next objective, leaving only silence in their wake. On the far side of the battlefield, an Imperial heavy walker lumbered into position, its cannons spitting fire at the advancing humans. The rounds hit, exploding against shields that flared but held. A single Home Guard soldier knelt, aimed a shoulder-mounted launcher, and fired. The weapon's projectile didn't explode. It simply punched through the walker's armor like it was paper, exiting the other side in a burst of light. The massive machine stood still for a heartbeat, then collapsed in a heap of smoking metal. By midday, the Empire's stronghold on Mirren Prime had fallen. Communications officers in the Imperial fleet watched in horror as their ground forces went dark one by one, their signals cut off not by jamming, but by the complete destruction of their positions. The Admiral in orbit knew what it meant. His ships were next. But the Home Guard didn't rush the kill. They were methodical, stripping away every layer of the Imperial presence on the planet before turning their full attention to the fleet. It wasn't just war. It was a message. Every move said the same thing. We are here now, and we are not leaving until this is over. Elias felt the tension in his soldiers shifting. The fear and exhaustion of the past months were gone, replaced with a quiet certainty. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were part of something much larger, something unstoppable. And the Empire, for the first time in centuries, was learning what it felt like to be on the wrong side of a war they couldn't win. The Empire's desperation showed in the way their ships began to move, no longer in tight, disciplined formations, but in scattered bursts, like prey animals trying to find an escape route. In the War Council aboard the Imperial flagship, the atmosphere was grim. Reports from Mirren Prime made it clear. The ground forces were gone, the forward fleet was crippled, and the Home Guard was advancing toward orbit. There was only one option left. The Admiral gave the order to deploy the Eclipse Fleet. The Eclipse Fleet had been a closely guarded secret for decades, hidden in deep space vaults and only to be used in the most dire circumstances. Each ship was a leviathan of war, coated in experimental armor, armed with weapons designed to tear apart entire cities from orbit. They had never been tested in real combat, not because the Empire didn't trust them, but because no enemy had ever been considered worth the risk of revealing them. Until now. From hidden jump points scattered across the sector, the Eclipse Fleet emerged. The ships were enormous, their hulls shimmering with strange energy fields. The sky above Mirren Prime darkened as their shadows stretched across the surface. To the Empire's commanders, it was a reassuring sight. a reminder that they still had the power to overwhelm anything, even this so-called real army of humanity. The Eclipse fleet fired first. A wave of energy blasts cut through the void, bright enough to be seen from the planet's surface. Elias Ward and the Home Guard soldiers on the ground braced for impact, the air vibrating with the force of the strike. When the blasts hit, they ripped through buildings, scorched the earth, and sent shockwaves across the battlefield. Dust and fire rose into the sky. For a moment, the Empire dared to believe they had turned the tide. Then the dust cleared. The Home Guard ships were still there. Shields glowed faintly where the blasts had struck, but none had fallen. Not one. In the silence that followed, a single voice came over the open comms. It wasn't Elias. It was the Home Guard commander. Calm, even polite. Return fire. The retaliation wasn't a barrage. It was a single focused strike. A massive beam of energy, white-hot and razor-thin, lanced out from the largest Home Guard ship. It cut through space in a straight, unwavering line, slicing directly into the Eclipse fleet's lead dreadnought. The beam didn't explode. It simply passed through, as if the ship wasn't even solid. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the dreadnought split in two, its pieces drifting apart in slow motion before detonating in a silent bloom of fire. The shock rippled through the Imperial formation. The Eclipse fleet was supposed to be untouchable. Now its flagship was gone in less than 10 seconds. Panic spread faster than orders could be given. The Home Guard moved in, their weapons firing with surgical precision, dismantling the fleet ship by ship. Every shot was deliberate, every target chosen to shatter the Empire's ability to fight back. From the Imperial flagship, Admiral Syraxis watched his last hope disintegrate before his eyes. He knew then what the Emperor had refused to admit: the war was already lost. The Home Guard wasn't just stronger, they were better in every way that mattered. On the ground, Elias heard the distant thunder of the Eclipse fleet dying in orbit. He closed his eyes for a moment, then spoke into his comm, his voice low but certain. It's over for them. They just don't know it yet. In the aftermath of the Eclipse fleet's destruction, the Imperial channels were eerily quiet. No more confident orders, no more rallying calls, just static, and the occasional broken transmission from ships trying to flee. The few Imperial vessels that managed to disengage limped away into the void, their crews too shaken to even respond to hails. The once proud fleet that had ruled the galaxy for centuries now looked like scattered debris, floating aimlessly in the shadow of the Home Guard's ships. Back in the Imperial capital, the War Council gathered in a private chamber deep within the palace. The Emperor sat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable as intelligence officers presented their final analysis. The findings were worse than anyone had imagined. The human forces the Empire had been fighting for years, those ragged bands of soldiers, mercenaries, and scattered fleets, had never been Earth's official army. They were expeditionary forces, small detachments, sometimes even volunteers. The battles the Empire thought were desperate human last stands were, in truth, little more than border skirmishes. One officer hesitated before speaking, as if afraid the words might spark panic. The Home Guard has never left Earth's defense until now. If this is their first deployment in recorded history, then this is the smallest they will ever be. They will only get stronger the longer this war continues. The Emperor's advisors shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances. Some looked pale, others furious, but none dared to meet the Emperor's eyes. The truth was undeniable. The Empire had not been fighting humanity's best. They hadn't even been fighting half of it. On Mirren Prime, Imperial prisoners sat in makeshift holding areas, their armor stripped away, their weapons gone. Some refused to speak to their captors, but others, especially the younger soldiers, asked questions. They wanted to know if the rumors were true, if the humans had more armies, if they had fought even greater wars before this one. Elias Ward visited one such prisoner, a lieutenant who had been captured during the first wave. The man's face was pale, his hands trembling. "Why didn't you send them before?" he asked, almost pleading. "If you had this Home Guard all along, why hold them back?" Elias studied him for a long moment before answering. "Because until now, we didn't need them." The lieutenant swallowed hard, lowering his gaze. The weight of that answer seemed heavier than any weapon. As the days passed, the Imperial remnants retreated further and further, abandoning worlds they had ruled for centuries. Every planet they left behind was quickly taken under human protection, the Home Guard's presence ensuring no counterattack would ever come. The galaxy was beginning to see humans not as an isolated, stubborn species, but as a power that could match or surpass any other. For the Empire, the war had become something far worse than a loss of territory. It was a loss of identity. They had built their power on the belief that no one could challenge them. Now, that illusion was gone, shattered by an enemy they had underestimated from the start. High above Mirren Prime, the Home Guard's fleet maintained its silent watch. Elias stood aboard one of their massive carriers, looking out over the dark curve of the planet. He knew the end was close. The Empire could keep fighting if they chose, but every day they delayed would only make their defeat more complete. And somewhere in the capital, the Emperor was beginning to realize the same thing. The Imperial capital had never been this quiet. The streets, once filled with the sound of marching soldiers and the hum of endless sky traffic, now lay still beneath a gray dawn. In the palace war chamber, the Emperor sat alone for a long time before the doors opened and his remaining admirals entered. Their armor was scratched, their eyes hollow. Not one of them spoke of victory anymore. On the central holomap, red markers representing Imperial fleets had dwindled to a few scattered points, each steadily blinking out as communication was lost. Around them, the blue lines of human-controlled space expanded like an unstoppable tide. The Home Guard had advanced without pause, claiming system after system, cutting through Imperial defenses as if they were made of glass. No new strategies, no secret weapons, no desperate gambles had worked. At last, the Emperor rose. His voice was low, but it carried the weight of a decision that would shape the galaxy for centuries. "Send the order," he said. "We surrender." The message traveled faster than light, crossing the galaxy in minutes. On every front, Imperial troops laid down their weapons. Ships powered down their weapon systems and drifted in silence as human vessels moved among them. No shots were fired. No terms were debated. The Empire's war machine simply stopped. On Mirren Prime, Elias Ward received the surrender confirmation aboard a Home Guard carrier. He stood on the command deck as the words echoed through the room. Some of his officers cheered quietly. Others simply let out long breaths they hadn't realized they'd been holding. Elias himself said nothing for a moment. He walked to the viewport, looking out at the stars where the Imperial fleet had once loomed. When the official delegation arrived from the capital, Elias met them without ceremony. The Imperial representative, draped in the symbols of a power that no longer existed, extended a data slate containing the signed treaty. His hands shook slightly. "The Emperor asks only that your real army leaves our worlds in peace." Elias took the slate, scanned the terms, and then looked the man in the eye. "We came because you forced our hand. Remember that the next time you think humans are weak." His voice was calm, but the message was sharp enough to cut through the years of Imperial arrogance. The news spread across the galaxy in hours. Worlds that had once bowed to the Empire celebrated in the streets. Former enemies of humanity sent cautious greetings, some offering alliances, others simply promising to keep their distance. And everywhere, in hushed voices, people spoke of the Home Guard, of the army that had never been seen before and might never be seen again unless provoked. That night, Elias stood alone on a balcony of the carrier, watching the lights of Mirren Prime's rebuilt settlements below. The war was over, but the lesson would last far longer than the battle scars. Somewhere out there, the galaxy was changing, and humanity had just claimed its place in the center of it. Behind him, a young Home Guard soldier stepped onto the balcony. "Sir, what happens now?" Elias gave a faint smile. "Now," he said, turning back to the stars, "we make sure they never forget who we are." The galaxy, still reeling from the speed of its greatest empire's fall, would not forget. And somewhere, in the silence between the stars, the Home Guard waited, ready to rise again if ever called.